Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. I am one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson, and joining me, as always, is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hello.
How you doing today, Trev?
Doing all right. You sprung a surprise recording podcast on me.
A doubleheader.
But here we go.
It's going to be fun.
I'd already done my homework, so I'm all set.
Yeah. If you are listening or watching, this is episode 99 of News You Care About, and in honor of the upcoming 100th episode of the show, we are doing a series of kind of like reflective look backs at video games. Last week's episode, we went through our favorite video game characters. This week, we're going to be diving through our favorite consoles and favorite games on the consoles. And then next week for episode 100, we will be diving through our favorite games of all time. So let's just dive right on into it. We've kind of broken the list up a little bit by kind of platform. We will begin with the Nintendo section. Then from there, kind of dive through the kind of wild card section of Sega, Xbox, and PC, and then bring it home with, I think it's fair to say, our bread and butter of PlayStation consoles. But Trevor, hit me with your first Nintendo console that you want to give a shout out to.
Yeah, so just as another kind of like precursor, like
legacy.
When we were talking about this, there you go. I see what you did there. When you originally kind of pitched this idea, I kind of went off of what we did last week a little bit, of like, okay, let me come up with like a top 10 list of like, here are the 10 consoles I'm going to talk about. I didn't really necessarily rank them in any order or anything like that. But I did kind of like limit myself to, here are the 10 consoles that I look back most fondly on and stuff. And so like with Nintendo, for example, Nintendo, arguably like one of the most iconic for me, but the Nintendo console I'm going to give a shout out to kick things off here is the Super Nintendo, because the original Nintendo is not on my list. I enjoy a lot of the games from that era, Super Nintendo is probably really when I started really getting into things, with, of course, iconically like the Final Fantasy games, because that was where I was introduced to that series, was with the Super Nintendo with Final Fantasy 2 and 3, aka Final Fantasies 4 and 6. And it was like there was such a beautiful breadth of RPGs on that system. Some of my other favorites would be Super Mario RPG and Earthbound. I didn't really play Chrono Trigger until much later, but obviously Chrono Trigger kind of made its name on the Super Nintendo as well. Secret of Evermore is like a deep cut favorite of mine that often gets overlooked by Secret of Mana. It's much more popular, like Big Brother. Stuff like ActRaiser I loved. Link to the Past I think is probably still my favorite Zelda game. And stems back all the way to that era. Obviously Super Mario World I think is a continuation of what had made that series great from the Nintendo era of things. And then you have like fun weird things like I don't like, it's certainly not something I think of all that often, but like I played the crap out of Mario Paint or like the Super Scope game. Like this was like an era of weird peripherals and stuff. And like having fun with those kinds of like variations is also where you start getting like Super Mario Kart, kind of like branching Mario out into these other realms that are going to come to help define his him for the next 30 years basically. But yeah, that Super Nintendo I think just has so many highlights, and there's like a breadth of Super Nintendo games and genres I didn't even really get into all that much. Like I didn't really play a ton of like the Castlevanias or the Super Metroids of that era, but like I got hella into your Aladdin and Lion King, and as I talked about a couple weeks on the show, like the Disney kind of games of that era were a ton of fun for me. So yeah, Super Nintendo kicks off my kind of list here as one of my favorite Nintendo era consoles.
A great shout out to the SNES will not be on my list, so I think it's kind of a nice balance, because I'm gonna have the console right before it with the NES on my list. for actually a lot of the similar reasons that Trevor said there, right? Like I think it's was in a similar vein a very kind of eclectic, weird console. And for me, the charm of the NES is all those kind of weird. It is the bubble bobbles, right, of the console, right? It is the kind of weirder things and balloon fight or ice climbers or those kind of games, obviously, right? Or again, obviously the game I talk the most about when I talk about the NES, which is of course Dr. Mario, which is one of my favorite games, probably ever. I love Dr. Mario, and so I think the NES is such a cooperative gaming experience. When I think of those games, it is just like sitting on the couch with my buddy Michael 20 years later, right? Because he owned all these games and all these consoles. And then obviously when I owned the NES Classic, or I still own it, I guess, but the NES Classic, right? And playing all of them again with him on that, right? Like it is just sitting on like a friend's couch trying to get like a better score than the person in any of these games and just having a great time and cranking up the Dr. Mario difficulty higher and higher and higher. And then alongside that are like genuinely great games, right? Like Mario 3, for example, I think, or like Mega Man 2. And I think that kind of fun balance between the sillier, goofier, kind of more co-op centered games and games that 35 years later are like still classics of the medium, right? I think is what makes the NES so special to me, right? And when I did get around to like playing the SNES Classic Edition, for me it was just missing the co-op side of the fun and the fact that so much of the SNES I think is sort of dominated by RPG elements, which is what you love about it and which is what I think like a little bit less about it. But yeah, for me it is, yeah, like Mario 3 I think is one of the best Mario games ever made. I think it's one of the best platformers ever made. I think that is just such a fantastically realized game and such a cool kind of culmination of the various Mario games up until that point. I think Mega Man 2, this is a point of contention. I think it's great. I think it is in some ways is like the only Mega Man game that works for me in like the main Mega Man series, but boy howdy does it work. And I think the NES is just a great console for platformers, and that is obviously the genre of games that first got me into video games, and one that I've kind of still to this day have a very kind of soft spot in my heart for. And the NES, I think, is just such a great home for those kind of games.
Yeah, no, I'm like the NES absolutely was like, you know, integral in my growing up. In particular, like playing Mario with like around the game room TV with my family and stuff, and you know, taking turns playing with my sister or with my dad or something like that, playing Dr. Mario, playing things like you know, Tetris, playing I've talked about occasionally like playing Cool Spot with my grandmother, which was like not the,
we gotta have a Cool Spot. Let's play on this
it's not the the platformer that's on the Super Nintendo era. The NES Cool Spot is basically like a puzzle game, where or like,
right, you've talked,
where it's like you pick colors, or you like like you and up to like, it was a 4-player game. So you and up to 3 other players like each have a color, and you pick a spot on the board, and then like somebody else picks a spot, and basically when they pick the spot, all of the spots around that spot turn to their color, and you're basically trying to like fill up the board with your color. Is basically that game. And I just remember playing that a ton with my grandmother and sister and dad, when we would go back and like visit family in Michigan and stuff. Like the Nintendo that I have is my grandmother's NES system, when basically she became kind of too nearsighted to be able to see it anymore. I kind of inherited it from her when I helped kind of pack up her house and stuff. So like it is definitely a near and dear console to my heart. But I think just so like the games are, while I think important, just don't hold up for me a lot of the time compared to more modern offerings and stuff like that. So
Sure.
I think like, golf and tennis and, a lot of those, I think like those are also very iconic elements of that game, of that system. And it's like, oh yeah, they just named the game off of the thing they were making the
Yeah,
mechanic of,
yeah.
because they
Also
didn't
true.
have, a deeper set of ideas or anything at the time.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, NES, absolutely, a worthy shout out, of course.
Yeah. I would say Mario 3 for actually like pick games. I would say Mario 3 and Dr. Mario are my two favorite games on the console itself.
Yeah.
Trevor, what's your next Nintendo game? We might share this one.
So my next one is the Game Boy Advance SP.
Ooh, we definitely don't share.
Yeah, I was gonna say I doubt we share this. Yeah, Game Boy Advance SP is basically my like Game Boy handheld Nintendo representation
Mhm.
here. And I picked this one in particular because it was backwards compatible. You could put, original Game Boy or Game Boy Color cartridges in this, as well as like advanced cartridges. And in some ways, like that was how you would, like, in particular, I remember using that system a ton with Pokemon, because you could put your like, Leaf Red cartridge in there alongside your, Pokemon Gold cartridge or something like that. And that was how you could kind of like link Pokemon across generations and stuff like that. And just like Pokemon is really like the big, Nintendo handheld of that era that I will give a shout out to. But being able to also play a lot of my favorites that by the Game Boy Advance era started getting like re-releases on cartridges. So like, I could play Final Fantasy 6 or Final Fantasy 4, in cartridge form on those on the go handheld devices. And they just, because the system had a backlight and stuff, worked significantly better than the original Game Boy that I would have with like, a contraption of plugins and add-ons to try and like brighten the screen and keep a battery charged and all sorts of stuff like that. But yeah, the like the early handheld era of Game Boy stuff kind of could all be played on that one console. So it's one of my favorites of that era, and being able to kind of like even some games that I had missed, like I hadn't played like the original Dragon Warrior games at the time before they would eventually adopt the Dragon Quest name. Like getting to play Dragon Warrior 1, 2, and 3 in handheld form for the first time through those kinds of devices was a ton of fun. So yeah, that's my shout out for Game Boy handheld stuff. The Game Boy Advance SP. That was the clamshell one.
That is not the next console on my list. My second Nintendo console I'm going to give a shout out to is the Nintendo 64, which is possibly the first console I've ever played. Again, it's very hazy kind of for me, but it is certainly the earliest one that I have like really solid concrete memories of playing, right? The first video game I ever remember beating was on this console in Super Mario 64, which, spoiler, is going to be my pick for my favorite game on this. But I think this had a really great bench of games. Obviously, GoldenEye on the N64 is also another very iconic game that kind of combined my two loves, right, of games and James Bond kind of all in one lump sum, and was a really, really great special landmark, obviously FPS shooter. The co-op in that game as well is iconic. Banjo-Kazooie, I know people love, but for me, this was a console that I played maybe NFL Blitz on, but otherwise I'm playing GoldenEye all day long, and I'm playing Super Mario 64 again and again and again, beating it, right? I still have like very vivid memories, right, of when I beat that for the first time. My two youngest cousins kind of on the floor next to me, like cheering and hooting and hollering. And like, I know the world of Mario 64 almost as good as any other video game I've ever been in, right? Like the different kingdoms and levels and windows you kind of go into. And I think it is such a good and unique and like perfectly like paced and lengthed game for a Mario experience, right? Like I think some of the NES and SNES Mario games can be a little too long for me. I think have like one or two too many worlds. I think Super Mario Odyssey, I can talk until I'm blue in the face, but how I think that game is just too long and too stuffed full of moons and everything. But I think the Super Mario 64 is just like spot on, perfect in terms of like the amount of stars you need to get, in terms of the amount of different worlds you go to, like the recurring gags throughout it. Just exploring Peach's castle is such a cool like idea and concept, and all the different secrets of it. And I think it is sort of a bridge between the era of video games of like the NES and SNES and even like Sega systems to the kind of more, more adult systems like the PS2, Xbox kind of era that would kind of follow in the wake of it. And it kind of serves as a great bridge, both literally in terms of like its evolution of the 3D space, but also in terms of like storytelling and the kind of games that were being created. So yeah, I definitely want to give a shout out to the N64.
Yeah, no, like N64 would probably be like my number 11 if I were to if I had like one more for me. And in particular, especially off that last point, like this is like N64 era for me was like middle school into high school, and I have incredibly fond memories of playing with Luke and Brian and Kobe and Ethan and Mike and Ben. Like that was kind of our crew where we would just kind of like we would play GoldenEye or Smash Brothers or Super Mario 64
Smash.
or
Mario Kart,
No Mercy or WWE and or WCW NWO, kind of like the wrestling games of that era and stuff. Like it was the era for 4-player multiplayer games, and especially kind of in that like bridging the gap to adult, because the next generations would be where we'd start getting like online connectivity and stuff. It was also like the death of that, or the end of that era of like couch co-op or couch like split screen multiplayer and stuff like that. And for me that hit at like the perfect time as we're, aging out of all those things and being able to like play these games together and spend afternoons at a friend's house and just like rotating, and the winner stays on, everybody else kind of swaps out in the next game and stuff like that. Definitely like iconic stuff. And yeah, to like Mario 64, like Mario 64 Ocarina of Time, it certainly had a glut of single player experiences as well. Mario 64, like I've made the argument that like Super Mario Odyssey is probably the best Mario game ever made. It is by no means the most like replayable, which would be like Mario 64. Like, yeah, it is way easier to go and hop in and just do a 120 star run in Mario 64 than it is to try and collect every moon in Super Mario Odyssey. So like I'm going to be much more inclined to try and do that. That said, because Nintendo like is constantly innovating and progressing design and stuff like that, I also really hate going back to N64 games at this point, because the control scheme does not feel good or fun or intuitive or any of that kind of stuff. The joystick was innovative, but also clearly nobody knew how to hold that controller. And games that get re-released nowadays are very hit or miss on whether or not they upgrade or update those controls effectively, and so often they don't, and like I think that holds back a lot of those games from a modern lens of trying to like go back and like replay or revisit them. But yeah, no, that was, I mean, definitely a classic era. And it was also, Nintendo being weird. Like some of my favorite games on there are like Beetle Adventure Racing or Snowboard Kids, like just the weird kiddie, completely like unlicensed. They're not the main, thrust of games or whatever, but like playing those things with family was just a ton of fun, outside of, the big name mainstays and stuff like that. And it was also, an era that had a ton of copycats. Like I remember, in addition to, Super Mario Kart or GoldenEye, I remember playing multiple South Park games that were like, there was a, South Park racing game or a South Park first person shooter, playing those with friends when we wanted to kind of switch things up and stuff. And, just the like very quickly hurried out and stuff like that. because you also, of
Yeah.
course, there's also the era where you have like Super Mario 64 iconically being a terrible game. So like it could be a very hit or miss. Shout out though to like Episode 1 Racer or Rogue Squadron as being other phenomenal like Star Wars games
It's a
of
great
that
shout
era.
out, yeah.
And like Episode 1 Racer I picked up on a sale recently is
So did I,
on my
like a year ago,
on my
yeah.
PS4. So there'll maybe be a that nerdy site
It
plays
holds up,
of
I
that
think. It's fun.
in
Yeah.
the coming weeks as I
Yeah.
as I finally circle around to hopping that one in and run around a pod racer. Maybe spoilers, maybe I'll do that. I'll schedule that around the time of Star Wars Skywalker Saga, Lego Star Wars Skywalker Saga coming out, so I can do like a Star Wars week.
Forgot about that.
So
That's a great point.
yeah.
That's a great point.
But yeah, shout out to the N64. Absolutely a stellar system. One that I certainly have fond memories that I couldn't necessarily replicate easily today, because so much of it was built around that like communal playing with my middle school and high school friends experience that is just a wildly different beast today. But yeah, absolutely.
Trevor, what's your next console?
So my next console is my last on the Nintendo side of things, and that is the Nintendo Switch. I think like despite a couple of the big headliners not being my particular cups of tea, like Breath of the Wild or whatever, I think the ability to like have that be a like the central gimmick of the thing being like you can pick it up and play on the go, or you can plop it in and play it on your TV, is an incredible gimmick for that and for what Nintendo does. And where Nintendo excels is Nintendo has never been the system that is driving games forward in terms of like technical achievements and crazy stuff like that. I mean, they do that on the like the control scheme side of things, but they've never been the ones to like push graphical fidelity forward significantly. I guess like not since the N64, I would say. They like since that era, they've always been like behind the curve on everything else with GameCube and the Wii and the Wii U. And so this by kind of pitching that more as like a handheld, it's like a really, really great handheld and a less than stellar console, but it still gives you great Nintendo games on that console. And in particular, as I said, kind of like Super Mario Odyssey, I think is arguably the best 3D Mario game. Yes, there is a ton to it, but it is there. If you could only play one Mario game, that might be the one to play, because you're going to get so much more out of it than you might necessarily get out of some of the other ones. But also, like obviously Animal Crossing's New Horizon was the game of the pandemic at the beginning. And as somebody who put like 400 plus hours, 500 hours into that game over the course of 2020, like who had never been an Animal Crossing fan really, like there's definitely something special about that, despite like almost in spite of itself, because Nintendo's online architecture still sucks, still terrible. But that game was still a ton of fun to play. Fire Emblem Three Houses was my game of the year a couple years ago, and a phenomenal kind of entry in that series. Hades, up there in my game of the year a couple years ago. Super Smash Brothers Ultimate is the ultimate Super Smash Brothers. Now Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is like the ultimate Mario Kart game. And for those that love it, Breath of the Wild obviously is a behemoth in the game. So the Nintendo Switch, it also picks up the lineage of one of my future spoiler entries, in that like the Vita would be the game that like everybody would port things to and you could play on handheld, and the Switch has kind of become that for a lot of like the PC games that I won't necessarily like. I mean, even like Hades, like I'm not necessarily jumping into that game on PC while it's in early access or something, but when it gets released and they put it on the Switch, I'm inclined to check it out or give it some eyes and stuff like that. So yeah, Nintendo Switch gets a lot of love from me, even though I can go significant stretches of time without playing
Without playing it.
Like I said, when I did Triangle Strategy recently, I don't think I'd played my Switch since Bravely Default 2 last year. So it went nearly a year without me touching it, but it's still a very, admirable system. And if we were in an era where I was, going to conferences and stuff like that kind of thing,
Sure.
it would also probably be getting a lot more play and love as a result of that.
Way.
But also, fuck the Joy-Con drift.
Yeah.
That is unbearable, and I refuse to buy any more Joy-Cons because they never get that right. So I'm just only ever going to play with Pro controllers at this point.
Yeah. The Switch would have been my number 11. In fact, I had it in my top 10, and then
until I was like, "Do you have any Sega systems?" And you were like, "Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put a Sega system on here instead."
Yeah, so it was number 10. It came number 11. I find this fun because we have no Nintendo game consoles that are the same. I really love that, actually. It's a really cool way to celebrate Nintendo. My Nintendo console that I'm going to celebrate actually is the Nintendo Wii. I think there's been a lot of ink spilled about the Nintendo Wii since they first came out in 2006, and a lot of bad things said about the Nintendo Wii, and a lot of them are true. But I think that was such a moment in time and such a zeitgeist for the first few years of the Wii that it really did feel like almost nothing else I've experienced in 25 plus years of playing video games. Like the Wii was such a moment in time. Like maybe the PS2 kind of hit on something similar, but like where like, yeah, grandparents are playing it, right? And, I can't possibly begin any sort of conversation around the Nintendo Wii without talking about Wii Sports, which I think is one of the most genius games to showcase a console ever made. I think it is a perfect demonstration of what this console is capable of what it can be, of its potential, of everything, and a way to get everyone in the door no matter what your experience with the games is. And it does all of that while also having really fun games in it, right? Like I think Wii Sports Tennis is a blast. Wii Bowling has been played at countless parties in the last 15 years. Like I think there's something really to Wii Sports, and its follow-up Wii Sports Resort, I think, is also really fun and another great like party game to play around like schools or with friends or with family.
And the Switch is going to get a sequel as well.
Yeah, which is actually something that might make me dust off my Switch. Like I think, those games are fun, and like the way that the Wii could also serve as like a quasi workout system, right? With like some of like the Wii trainer stuff they had and like those exercise things, like it really was like Nintendo doing something different, and like it definitely didn't land all of its punches, but the ones that did land really worked for me, obviously, and that leads to my single favorite Mario game of all time, one of my favorite games of all time for a tease for next week, which is Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. Which I just think are like flawless video games almost. And I think perfectly nailed down the sense of like magic and wonder and like platforming, just like pitch perfectness of what a Mario game should be. I think the worlds are so rich and full of life and so full of colors. I think the gravity element of it is sort of a genius move on the part of Nintendo. And Miyamoto, like I think the Galaxy games are just phenomenal games, and along with the like Wii Sports and Wii Sports Resort and the Wii Trainer kind of stuff, I think again showcase what I like about Nintendo, which is this kind of elastic nature to it in terms of like really fun party games, really fun like family games. I think the Mario Party, for example, on the Wii is one of my favorite Mario Party games made, and the Mario Kart I think is also similarly excellent, mixed with really great kind of more like single player focused games, whether it be obviously the Galaxy games, whether it be like new Super Mario Brothers Wii, which I think is a great like co-op Mario experience that I just remember playing through again and again and again with my younger sister, and like always having fun skirting that fine line of like enjoying our time together and wanting to kill each other as we bounce on each other's heads and send each other to our doom. Like I think the Wii for me, kind of what you said for the 64 for you, hit at like the perfect time, right? Like the Wii came out 2006, I'd have been 14, so it hit right as I was going into high school. And so it was great to like have the bros over it and play some of these various games, or more, than that, like play it with my sister, play it with my younger cousins who I had shown like, the Mario games in the 64 or shown like PS2 games with. And we're now like finally hitting the point to like be old enough to play games with me, really. And so like going through Mario games with them and going through Wii Sports with them and getting these like family competitions and challenges and everything. Or when we were feeling really sort of maniacal, doing a 4-player New Super Mario Brothers Wii, which is true chaos in the true sense of the word. Like, I think the Wii perfectly captured this sense of like whimsy and fun, and it was very rarely perfect, but it had those select few moments where like everything just clicked so well. And so yeah, for me, I had to give a shout out to the Wii. You would see, I think, Nintendo pull a lot of the wrong lessons from the Wii with the Wii U, but in the Wii, I think it was such a pop culture moment.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember when did that release?
I thought it was 2006.
Yeah, you're right. Because I remember working at a Costco at the time, or not. I guess not at the release, but I remember working at a Costco at some point in its life cycle, and like when we would get a pallet of Wii consoles, just how quickly they would be snatched up, and off the floor. And I'm pretty sure that's ultimately where I ended up like getting one of mine, was like while I was working there. Because it basically would be like, all right, I'm just grabbing this and, gonna pick it up and make that purchase. And then because like I was well into college at this point, so I wasn't, playing games like in a communal setting or anything like that anymore. Like so much of that system for me is just like, I didn't really put a ton of time into those things.
Right.
It's gimmicky. It's playing Zack and Wiki treasure quest or whatever.
Yeah,
and
that's
doing
a
that.
deep pull.
It's playing like I have Skyward Sword that I don't think I ever opened because it was past the time I was playing the Wii ever. Like I probably picked up like Mario Kart and Smash Brothers and stuff to play those, those iterations of the game. And yeah, Mario Galaxy and stuff. And that's probably about all I played on my Wii. I might have taken it over to my family's house at some point and like played Wii Sports or something. Actually, no, what it was, when I had my Wii, because it could read GameCube discs, I traded in my GameCube, but kept my games. And so I would probably play a lot of GameCube stuff on my Wii more than likely.
Within Wii games.
Or I would play, a hand, like, because that was also, when you have the beginning of the Wii eSport or the Wii eShop, Nintendo eShop stuff. And so like I remember in particular playing Final Fantasy IV, The After Years, which got released as like
for us,
a multi, like it got released as like an episodic game for what had been my first Final Fantasy game, 15, 20 years later, or whatever it was. And just playing that on the Wii, even that I didn't play like a ton of, and I put more time into it when it came to some other thing later. But yeah, it was like, when all is said and done, as like iconic as a system as the Wii was, I have very few memories of like actually sitting down and playing it, just because I didn't have anyone to play it with. I do have that GoldenEye. I have the Wii GoldenEye.
I've also
picked that up. It's fine. But because I didn't have other people to play it with or anything like that, it's a completely different sensation than the original, obviously. So yeah, like the Wii is such a novel, weird Nintendo thing in the grand scheme of things, and it sucks that potential like I would love to, like, and finally I was able to, I guess, hop into Super Mario Galaxy again, but I hate that you are restricted to those controls. Same with like Skyward Sword. I would love to like actually sit down and play Skyward Sword
and play that,
and they've given me the opportunity to do that on Switch, but like I'm not interested in doing the motion controls to swing my sword around and stuff like that. So like potentially good games are being inhibited by very like it's always fascinating that Nintendo never gets held to task for their refusal to be an accessible system.
Yeah.
And that continues on to this day. If you have accessibility issues, Nintendo is probably not going to be for you, and that sucks. So yeah, that's unfortunate, but you know, I can respect it especially for like the era that it hit for you in.
I
it's
think
going to be certainly iconic.
that's totally fair, right? And I think we'd be remiss if me and Trevor didn't put on our, angry Nintendo gamer hats for a second here and talk. Yeah, like obviously
I talked about I actually do have Epic Mickey because I still have it here from when I talked about Disney games a couple weeks ago. That was another game I put a ton of time into that and had fun with it, and I would love to play Epic Mickey now on a modern console, but I can't anywhere, and it's there's so much stuff that is just locked because Nintendo decides to innovate every generation or whatever, and refuses to make their things kind of like
update
future accessible.
Yeah, I mean, Nintendo is a mess of a console maker, and we can all acknowledge that. And I think you at times have to like Nintendo in spite of the things, and I'm okay saying that, and so is Trevor. And some people, a slice of the gaming community maybe is more okay with just put it on blinders to Nintendo's problems, which is like fair to each their own. But Trevor, we're done with Nintendo. We're done talking about Nintendo. No more of them. We're going into the weird kind of potpourri section here of the episode. What is the next console that you want to give a shout out to?
So I will dive over into, and I think you have this as well, just broader PC, just in general, be that, going all the way back to playing things on like floppy disks I don't know if it was a proper Commodore 64, if it was just like an IBM something, but like playing Monopoly and Wheel of Fortune in like those really old school stick a floppy disk in there. But then on into, Wolfenstein 3D and Doom and Duke Nukem and like that early era of first person shooters for me. Certainly, cemented memories. But then on into games like Civilization and that whole series, and pretty much anything Sims or Sim City or Sim Ant, and I have probably 20 games over on a shelf over here that have some semblance of Sim in the title, because they were just making a ton of things over there at Maxis at that time. But yeah, like obviously The Sims, when that kind of eventually would blow up, but like also RTS games like Warcraft before World of Warcraft, like Warcraft 1, 2, 3, Age of Empires, stuff like that, Theme Park, Theme Hospital, Roller Coaster Tycoon. Like I put a ton of time into like playing PC back in the day, back before console gaming kind of reached the level that it has reached and kind of overtook that as a primary sense of enjoyment, and just like a ton of fun and a ton of like engagement and diversity of genres and stuff like that. I mean, there's also like a lot of people talk about like playing demo discs from like PlayStation Underground and stuff like that. I never got those magazines, but I had PC Gamer, and I remember putting a ton of time into like PC demos and playing like the first level of like hundreds of games and stuff that I would never actually like even remember today or anything like that. But like just the diversity of things I got to experience and play on PC was a ton of fun over the years, and it's fun now still to like hop back into occasionally. Like I mean, even there, Skyrim is a game that I have predominantly played on PC. I put like 300 plus hours into Skyrim on PC, and that's probably like one of the more recent like big time sucks, because that would have been like late college maybe for me, or early post college kind of time, and so like even that, like getting to throw fun mods on games and do the weird things that you can do with these games now is a ton of fun. So and like I obviously don't have it yet, and who knows if a year from now it'll make a list like this, but like I'm kind of really excited for the Steam Deck and being able to like do the Switch version for all those PC games in my Steam library, being able to play those on the go again.
I'm not excited about the Steam Deck, but I am excited about the PC list, which is our first console we actually sync up on, which is amazing for us two typically non-PC playing gamers. Yeah, I mean, you took a lot of the games out of my mouth, right? I think Civilization is a huge game in my like gaming library that I loved growing up as a kid playing. Like the earliest Civilization games. My dad is still playing like Civ 3 and 4 on his computers to this day. And like just had me download it when I was last back at home. I had to go visit him. Like he still got his saves from like 10 years ago and 15 years ago, right? Like he also an indictment of the computer, but like he like that is like the only games really my dad has ever played of Civilization games, and he loves them. He'll just like dive through saves after save after save, game after game after game. And so like playing that with him growing up as a kid. Age of Empires is another great pull. The Sims is another one that I really loved until it got like too existential for me. And then like Sim City is one that I really love. Like I think there's so many great games from like the like early late mid 90s kind of time period when we were kind of growing up. Like to say nothing of like Carmen Sandiego, all of the backyard sports games, which were some of, I mean, they did their purpose. They were some of the earliest games I remember playing that helped to further facilitate my love of sports and my love of games, right? And kind of combine that. Backyard baseball, football, in particular, are like two ones that I have like very strong memories of playing for years and years and years. Yeah, like I think nowadays looking back, like I don't like if we started playing games in like 2010 or even like 2005, like I think the landscape is just so different that you would have just walked right into console gaming and never looked back, I feel like. But like we were, I think, kind of fortunate to have the best of both worlds, including my pick for my favorite PC game, or certainly up there, which is Oregon Trail, which I think, like, which I've written about it before. Like, I think that game tapped into something so perfect for me, right? And became this like competition among like all different kids who played in computer class with you, right? And you know, for me, like we would basically get like the last like 10 or 20 minutes of the class just to, like play games, or we'd have like dedicated Fridays just to, like goof off on, right? And play games all period long. And it was like, how far into Oregon Trail can you get? How close to the finish line can you get, right? And you know, never making it to the end, never winning the Oregon Trail as a kid growing up, and then going back a few years ago and doing it for a piece over at IP, and like finally winning for the first time, and like that kind of like 15-20 year like circle to get there was like a really cool moment, and tapping into like a love of history that I have, a love of games and storytelling and like adventure and competition. Like it's like all the best elements of those things juxtaposed to like my favorite modern PC game, which would be like the Emily's Away series, or Gone Home, which I think taps so much into the power of like smaller, more intimate, personalized stories, that either you craft your own narrative through and kind of own journey through, carrying your own kind of personal baggage and experience, like is Emily's Away, or get in this really well told kind of personalized story in something like Gone Home, to kind of trace the arc of PC games over the last 25 years has been really fun as well. And even though I don't play a lot of PC games, like neither one of us really do, I have very, very, very strong memories of playing them as a kid. And the few and selected games I do play now as an adult are typically ones that really stick with you, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, in addition to obviously Emily's Away series, you know, our game of the year last year as a site,
Mm-hmm.
but like Stardew Valley. While I would eventually go on and like play it again a little bit on Switch, like I put most of my time into Stardew Valley back when it came out because it tapped into a game genre that I love and got the buzz behind it. And I was like, all right, I'm getting sucked in. I have to check this game out. And then had a ton of time, a ton of fun with that game. Something like Undertale, like you know, obviously took the world by storm, as well in the PC space, even if it has, you know, since come on to other consoles and stuff. But yeah, just shout out to, you know, a ton of those phenomenal kind of entries. But yeah, like for me, so much of like what I look forward to with the Steam Deck is I have most of the Final Fantasy library in my Steam library at this point, and so I will be able to play those games kind of all in one place because Nintendo hasn't been able to get them, or Square Enix hasn't put them on the Switch or whatever. So like having kind of a lot of those classics and some of my favorites kind of all in one nice, easy, convenient place that I can play is going to be a ton of fun. Alongside, some of these wild, crazy experiences. Because, like, also I'll give a shout out to Half-Life, Half-Life 2, Portal, which all did like amazing things to kind of advance narrative storytelling in the shooter genre, first-person shooter genre, compared to your Dooms and Wolfensteins and stuff, which were very bare bones in terms of story up to that point. So, yeah, like they done real good in the PC gaming space, and I get why a ton of people will pour thousands of dollars into their systems to be able to like play some of that stuff on the best looking specs and stuff. Especially because like in this day and age, most of the games you're getting will also eventually come to PC, or will launch day and date on PC. So, they are kind of all consoles in one sometimes. For a lot of stuff out there. So yeah, shout out to PC.
Absolutely. Trevor, what's next? I guess it's my turn actually.
Yeah, technically. You also had PC, but yeah, if you want to throw in a new suggestion out there, go for it.
Mine's gonna be, because basically Trevor's gonna have one Xbox game. I'm gonna have one Sega console. I'll give a shout out to really Sega in general. I think is like a fun kind of weird what if we had gone that route instead of Nintendo in the early 90s. But obviously if you're going to talk about Sega, you're really going to talk about one series, which is Sonic. My shout out is going to be Sonic 2.
So the Genesis.
Genesis, yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not shouting out the Master System. Like the Sega Genesis, I think, is the one that obviously most kind of penetrated the larger kind of pop culture. And give a shout out to like Mortal Kombat here as well, but like for me, Sega is defined by Sonic in so many ways, and I think Sonic 2 is the best of those early Sonic games. The joke being, of course, that the best Sonic game now came out on the PS4, but I think Sonic 2 is great.
Came out on a lot of things. Yeah, Sonic Mania.
Yeah, but I think that Sonic 2 defined so much of the early 90s for me, right? Again, this is one of the earliest games I remember playing. I can't even remotely pinpoint how old I was or when it came out or where I was at, kind of thing. I just know that my family had a Sega when I was growing up, and then I remember playing Sonic. It is sort of in the same bucket as like the hazy Crash Bandicoot memories I'll have on the PS1 when we get to that. But Sonic is fun. He's got an attitude and he's quippy, and he felt like everything Mario wasn't, right? And this is not new ground that I'm treading here with this. It was
really literally their marketing campaign.
And
Sega
it's very
does
effective
what Nintendo don't.
Yeah, for kids, but like it felt real, right? And with an older brother who really loved the Nintendo, I gravitated toward the Sonic and Sega Genesis because it was like my thing, right? It was a way to like differentiate yourself from being different. Like, oh, like he's got that, but like this is my thing, right? And I think there is this sort of like charm and like sneering energy to the Genesis that I've always really liked. And it is not a great video game console, probably, but it is one of the more important video game consoles. And I think a lot of the things that were cool about the Genesis, I think, would kind of be taken over by PlayStation in a lot of ways going forward. And then they would just like actually do them well in a lot of ways. But I think Sonic is great, and I think Sonic is really good. And I think the kind of issue with Sonic for a lot of people is that they listen to the Sega market in a lot of ways and compare it to Mario, when in reality they're two very different kinds of games and two very different kinds of platformers. And I think you enjoy both, right? Like you enjoy what Mario does very well, better than almost anyone in terms of like pure platforming. And you also, if you're me or a Sonic fan, enjoy what Sonic does that's very different than a lot of stuff, which is all about like speed and looking cool and just this kind of like fun sense of energy to it, right? And I think Sonic doesn't take itself too seriously. I think it has this like PG edge to it versus like the G edge of Mario games. And and it's appealing and it's fun. And when a Sonic game is done right, I think it does have something special to it. And I think that is the case in Sonic 2 here.
Yeah, my I grabbed here. I don't know if I'll be able to get it in camera shot, but I've had my mini Genesis sitting here like by my setup since I finished the NES retro series that I would do as a series of Let's Plays last year. I've had like the Genesis there as like the next one ready to go, because my Genesis experiences are largely limited to Sonic, to Mortal Kombat, to Echo the Dolphin, and then like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers fighting game or something like that. I did not have I was fortunate enough to kind of grow up with both a in a Nintendo and Sega household up until like Sega CD era of stuff, and when we moved past that, I was just like, I don't really care about these other things on the Sega side of things. So like going in and if I actually sit down and record Sega Genesis mini Let's Plays and stuff like that, that'll be a fascinating kind of look back, because so much of that is just complete unknowns to me. I was very like, while I had one, I was definitely not a Sega kid. I was much more in the Nintendo camp of things, and yeah, so like it'll be a fascinating kind of like experiment on what that looks and feels like here in 2022 compared to if I'd been playing those things at the time or gotten more into them.
Trevor, talk to me about Xbox.
Yeah, so for my Xbox, so I had an original Xbox. I won it at my high school graduation,
Love it.
which again just makes me feel really, really old. I never had a 360, and then I got an Xbox One X for Sunset Overdrive to play that, and then ended up also playing a little bit of Halo Master Chief Collection and a handful of other Xbox games over that generation. But really, I want to give a shout out here to the Xbox Series X, current generation of things, and in particular Game Pass. Like Xbox Game Pass is the real choice that I'm going with on this one, because I've been able to play so many things that I wouldn't have otherwise checked out, or I've gotten to kind of play so much of the Xbox library of games because of that simple, subscription service, both Xbox games as well as like the games they make partnerships with. Most recently, Tunic. I was interested in Tunic, and then I became disinterested in Tunic when I realized it was going to be like a pain in the ass difficulty thing. But then the combination of realizing it had like a no fail mode as well as it being on Game Pass was like, that's enough for me to give it a shot, and let me go check this out, and had a blast with it. Forza. I've never been a Forza person, but it was on Game Pass, so I checked it out. Crackdown. Terrible game. Crackdown 3. Terrible game. But I didn't feel like I was losing any money by playing it, because I was playing it on Game Pass. And, the Halo games, the Gears games, like Psychonauts 2 last year, one of my favorite games of last year, I played because it was on Game Pass, and I had I had easy access to it, and that's just going to continue. Like now that I could go back and play any Bethesda game I wanted to without having to, and the like, it's, I guess it's Game Pass mixed with Xbox backwards compatibility, so being able to boot up Fallout 3 if I wanted to play it on Xbox, I can do that, as opposed to having to try and like dig out my PS3 and admittedly, Bethesda never ran well on the PlayStation 3, so like that's not going to be a fun experience for me anyway. But yeah, like just like getting to do that, I look forward to the breadth of games that I'm going to get to do that with in the future. I mean, even like Flight Simulator, and getting to kind of like pick that up and play that and kind of share that now with my dad, since I got him a Series S. Like being able to just enjoy that, and yeah, there's just been a ton of games in the last few years that I've been like, I mean, especially even if I'm not going to put a ton of time into these games, having the ability to just be like, I need to record Let's Plays for Tuesdays and Thursdays. Let me go see what's out there on Game Pass, and hop in and check this out. Oh, this Pedestrian. Oh, that's a interesting little puzzle platformer. I'm gonna record a Let's Play on that, and then basically uninstall it and never play it again or never touch it again. Like,
Right.
so yeah, just the like that ability and functionality is just really solid, and especially when compared to the PS5, the like Xbox delivery, what was it called, whatever it is that like like we will download whichever the right version of
Oh.
your game is onto your Xbox Series X, leaps and bounds ahead of, oh, I'm playing Cyberpunk on my PS5. Well, I've got to have my PS4 disc in there, and sometimes it'll just automatically try and install the PS4 version of the game, and so I have to have 2 copies of the game on the on the system. Like smart delivery, that's what it is for Xbox. So like just general shout out to Xbox Series X, as well as all of the great decisions business wise they've been making in recent years. Like even like last year before the Legendary Edition came out, going back and playing through the Mass Effect games, and now you can do that with the Legendary Edition, is like just incredible gaming opportunities. And so yeah, shout out to that, especially because I can also then still go back and play a lot of that old library of Xbox games. One of the first games I booted up in my Series X was my Knights of the Old Republic original Xbox disc, and being able to play that on a modern system was a joy and a delight. So yeah, shout out to Xbox Series X and just Microsoft in general, making a lot of smart decisions on that console and their business practices these days.
Here. Without further ado, let's launch right on into the bread and butter here. We are going to have 5 PlayStation consoles. If I had to guess, 4 of the 5 are going to be the same. There's going to be 2 that'll be different. Trevor, let's start with the PS1.
Yeah.
I think we each collectively have it on. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. For me, the PS1 is Crash Bandicoot and Twisted Metal, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is that machine, right? I've written before about how Crash Bandicoot is maybe the first game I ever played, or maybe it's a false memory. I'm not really sure. But it's certainly the legacy of that, I think, and kind of the early love of Naughty Dog from some of my very earliest years to now. Obviously, we're kind of laid here, kind of a continuation of my love of platformers, obviously from where we kind of discussed with Mario 3 and Mario 64 before this. But for me, it is Twisted Metal is my favorite game on the PS1. I think those games are everything a like 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kid would love about video games. They're big, they're brash, they're loud, they're colorful, they're over the top. There's this terrifying clown. They're just so larger than life, and they're fun to drive around and play and blow stuff up in. It is so of its time. The Twisted Metal series, like those first few, first 4, I guess they had in the PS1, and also kind of timeless because they keep bringing the series back and making more and more games. But those first few had just such a magic to them, and yeah, for me, that is what the PS1 is Crash, and it's Twisted Metal in particular, which I know is a very different experience to what your PS1 journey was, Trev.
Yeah, I do want to shout out, talking about Twisted Metal, a friend of mine from college, Allison Taffel, is working on the upcoming Twisted Metal show. The like,
that's rad.
Is it a Netflix series or whatever? Like she basically announced,
that's a cool shout out.
She has a she's been working in television as a writer since I think Raising Hope was her first show. She's worked for like the Tonight Show with Stephen Colbert. Most recently,
it is a Peacock series.
It's a Peacock series. Okay, she worked on BoJack Horseman. She was a writer for BoJack Horseman, and yeah, when they announced recently the upcoming Twisted Metal series, and like had a Variety article or whatever, I saw her post on Facebook, "Hey, I can announce that I'm working on this," and I was like, "Awesome." Cool. Yeah. Especially because she also shared that like it had been like a wish list project of hers for a while. Like she shared a post from like 2013 or something like that of like, like, hey, so and so, give us the rights to Twisted Metal and let us make a movie on it or something like that. So just shout out to that, because yeah, Twisted Metal obviously stand out for me as well, which is largely in contrast to for me, PlayStation was my RPG console.
Yeah.
I, as somebody again who loved the Final Fantasy series, the first games I ever played on PlayStation were Final Fantasy VII. Well before I had a PlayStation of my own, it was going to a friend's house and playing Final Fantasy VII and being like, "They're up to 7? What the heck? I just played Final Fantasy 3." Like, not realizing at the time that like we had different naming conventions between the U.S. and Japan, that were, the walls were being broken down there. But then eventually, my dad would pick up a PlayStation console and like a handful of games down at the swap meet that he worked at on the weekends. And so I remember him coming home with it basically just in a gray plastic bag with a purple memory card on there. So shout out to him knowing that memory cards were a thing you needed in this day and age. And like I remember, apart from like the bread and butter for me, but I remember putting a ton of time into a game like Carmageddon, basically the precursor for GTA games, where you're just driving around and like doing missions and stuff, almost like Crazy Taxi-esque, but like a R-rated Crazy Taxi where you're also just running down people. But yeah, eventually Final Fantasy 7, 8, even though I don't like 8 all that much, Final Fantasy 9, getting Final Fantasy Anthology, Final Fantasy Chronicles, and Final Fantasy Origins basically meant I had almost every Final Fantasy game that had been released up to that point on the original PlayStation. Final Fantasy Tactics, of course. That was where I played Chrono Trigger for the first time. It was in one of those collections. And apart from that, Harvest Moon Back to Nature is like the other iconic like original PlayStation game. But yeah, I didn't play Metal Gear Solid. I didn't play Crash in that era, Crash Bandicoot in that era. Like a lot of the other iconic PlayStation games of that time just weren't like, I was very like, because I was still, 1 foot into the N64 camp at the time. And so that was what I was playing with my friends. And then I would come home and play Final Fantasy games on my PlayStation. And so yeah, that was largely my experience. Like Castlevania Symphony of the Night would not play until years later. So yeah, like a lot of the most iconic Final Fantasy game or PlayStation games were largely, missed by me at the time. Some of them have gone back and checked out since. I guess Resident Evil be another series. Nope, didn't touch it at all. But yeah, like I still have so many of the, like I have all those Final Fantasy discs to this day. If I wanted to or could boot up a original PlayStation, still got a bunch of that stuff there. So yeah, that was definitely my original PlayStation era, and it was largely like that was why I wanted a PlayStation. Was I loved the Final Fantasy series so much, I wanted to I was willing to follow it when they left Nintendo and went to PlayStation, because they wanted to play with polyhedrons and stuff like
that. Trev, let's talk about the PS2.
Yeah.
Obviously the highest on video game console of all time by a significant margin.
Yes, largely because it was a very affordable DVD player. But yes.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah. And one of the, I think, most important video game consoles ever released, and one with a very long lifespan. What are some of your favorite games off of the PS2?
So this is one, like, admittedly, this is one I traded in so many of my games at some point. So like I have a whole bunch of like lost memories because like I reached a point where I was like, I'm, like I'm broke in college and was in between jobs or something like that. So I'm going to trade in a whole bunch of my games and get pittance from Game Crazy. Not even GameStop, Game Crazy, that doesn't even exist anymore, I don't think. But some of the ones that I still have in my collection that I do look back on fondly, Kingdom Hearts, of course, like despite not really following that series where it would go after Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. I did come back for Kingdom Hearts 3, but like I've not delved into most of Kingdom Hearts. But like those that first game was Disney meets Final Fantasy what more could Trevor want? This was
Yeah,
the
right.
wild. How is this a thing that exists? The original God of War games,
Yep.
Final Fantasy 10 and 10
Mhm.
2 were in this era, and those were for a while there, like the last Final Fantasies I really enjoyed and really connected with, despite continuing to play them a lot. But yeah, this is also an era, like, because I was still, largely locked into RPGs at that time,
Mhm.
didn't, put a ton of time into them. The Grand Theft Auto games, of course, got a ton of my playtime, but like stuff
Yeah.
like Jack and Daxter I didn't play, stuff like
Yep.
Ratchet and Clank I didn't play, the Shadow of the Colossus games I didn't play
Mhm.
at that time. Some of them I've gone back and kind of played since, but like obviously those are iconic elements. But this is also the era where I'm playing Lego games, Lego Star Wars, and
Mm.
that kind of and
Mm.
that ilk. Having a ton of fun with those things.
Mhm.
Trying to think if there's anything else. Dragon Quest VIII I picked up in large part because it had a demo for Final Fantasy 12, but also I was a fan of the Dragon Quest series, so getting to play that, yeah, that would have been 8, and that was like a cool evolution of the series going into
Yeah.
a more 3D kind of feel compared to Dragon Warrior 7, which is an honorable mention for my original PlayStation list as well. So yeah, I think those are a lot of my big heavy hitters. God of War, Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy, GTA. Oh, and
So the
Destroy All
PS,
Humans. I'll give Destroy
yeah.
All Humans a shout out too.
So the PS2 is easily by a Mississippi Mile the video game console I've played more than any other in my entire life. It's not even close. I mean, like maybe with like online games like the PS3, PS4 get within you know seeing distance of the PS2, but it is not even close. I mean, basically from 2000 through 2010, this is basically the only video game console I had. I mean, like the Wii was there, but like it wasn't. It was very much a periphery thing. And I got the PS3 late, right? So like I didn't get it until a couple years into its lifespan. So like it was the PS2, right? And it is both the console that really made me fall in love with video games, and also the console also like somebody like burn out a little bit because I had the PS2 for so long after other new consoles had come out, right? That like I began to be like I've played literally everything on this console kind of thing. Um, but the PS2 was like it is basically an entire decade of like all of my like growing up memories of games, right? So from when I was 8 years old in 2000 until right I was what I'd been 18 by the time 2010 happened, right? So like yeah, basically all of my like public school education essentially was on the PS2, right? It's playing, the Medal of Honor series that I talk about and love so much, right? Like Rising Sun, Frontline, European Assault in particular, and like just doing because we were maniacs. Me and my like best friend at the time, Brandon, would just play hour-long matches of like the co-op on that, or not co-op, of like the multiplayer where you could add in bots and just play hour-long matches so you could get the most kills, us versus the bots. We would do like head-to-head and then add in bots for that. We would do like the campaign again and again and again. I've played Rising Sun's campaign a lot. We would do the same thing for like Rising, or not Rising Sun, for European Assault. It was playing GTA 3, Vice City, San Andreas again and again and again, both chasing the cops and seeing how long it could last, and also playing through the campaign of those games, right? Like GTA 3 is a fundamental game in my gaming like history and gaming canon, and Vice City is one of my very favorite games of all time, that I just know so well, and even San Andreas in terms of like that impact on it. It is experiencing, yeah, Jack and Dexter, Precursor Legacy, 2, 3, Combat Racing, one of my favorite racing games of all time. And like just some of my favorite memories ever are playing through the Jack and Dexter collection. No matter what time I'm playing it, I still find something new that I love about, I think, that series of games. It is looking at like this is like the golden age in a lot of ways of like James Bond video games, right? With Agent Under Fire, Nightfire, and Everything or Nothing coming out 3 games in a 4-year stretch. It was like a great, and then you also had a movie in the middle of that too. So it was a great time to be a Bond fan, right? And really kind of fall in love with all these, and just again doing me and Brandon against bots matches again and again and again. Like this is the co-op console for me, and this is the like me falling in love with like stories console at the same time. That like defines like the backbone of like my connection from the games I played as like a toddler to like a young child of like the N64, PS1 kind of Sega era to me being a full blown adult now for the PS3 kind of generation. This kind of forms that tunnel to the two, and kind of defined what my taste would be. Obviously, my love of Naughty Dog continues here. And Jack, right? It is all these kind of things. And then what I really love about the PS2 is something we kind of talked about briefly before we started recording. It was weird as shit. It's a weird console full of weird eclectic games. And so it's stuff like I really love Cold Winter, which is like a super dark, gritty, M-rated like spy game with a great multiplayer. I really love Enter the Matrix, and like playing through like that kind of game. It is the like era of like Gran Turismo, right? And like racing games were like really good here. Shout to Shrek racing. It's super fun and dumb. It is the age of like licensed games of varying quality, but you play all of them kind of thing. And like Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2. Like this was just such a game where like everyone was making everything and there were so many games to play, and it's going to the movie store at Diamond Video, Nixon, Missouri, and seeing what releases it had, the Godfather games, Scarface, right? Like, I played so many games on this console. It is easily the console I played the most number of games and the most hour of games, and was like my primary console for the longest stretch of time. I have incredibly fond memories of the PS2. It is probably my favorite console ever, although the PS4 is kind of right there with it. I think the PS2 is just, there's so many. I could sit here and name games forever. Destroy All Humans, like you said. War of the Monsters is another great like mashup kind of King Kong, Godzilla-esque game that's a ton of fun.
I know you're a huge fan of it, so I'll give you the shout for Bully.
Bully, oh my god, absolutely. Yeah, one of my very favorite games of all time. I think in the running for being the best game Rockstar's made. I think Bully is great, and that's a game that I didn't play at the time, but came back to later on after listening to shout to Mitch Dyer actually recommending it on a Podcast Beyond segment, and me being like, I really should get back and like finish playing Bully and like start a new game. And was like, oh my god, it's amazing. Like I just think there's so many hidden treats and so many hidden gems in this console. I never even played Shadow of the Colossus at the time, mainly because I don't think it's that great. But like, there's so much goodness here, and even if you don't like one big series, there's probably another one. So if you don't like Jack, there's Ratchet. If you don't like Ratchet, there's like, all the other giant PS2 mascot platformers of that era. And I just think it is such a fun era of video games. And the seedlings of Call of Duty are laid here, obviously, with Call of Duty 3. I think the PS2 is a great console, and really laid the groundwork for kind of the cementing of my love of the PS3 and PS4 that was to come.
Want to give a shout out to one that I forgot about until I was looking at a list. Because I know Cameron likes this one as well. .hack, Infection, Mutation, Outbreak, Quarantine, a series of 4 games that like it's basically like 4 chapters of a larger story, and you would carry over like items from one game to the other through saves and stuff in a that happening in Mass Effect and stuff like that kind of world. Mm-hmm. And I remember first getting into that series because one of my friends in high school went to E3 before my senior year, and came back and gave me a demo disc because he knew I like video games. He gave me the demo disc of .hack Infection, which is like the first game in that series, and I was like, I don't know anything about this, and I played it, and it was like the premise of the game was basically like you're a player in an open world game, but something is going on and there's like some kind of weird mystery, and like people are dying in the real world, and and it may be tied to the game or whatever. And so it was all of the trappings of like playing like a World of Warcraft kind of game, but it was all a single player experience, and like the other characters that like join you online are like scripted AI and stuff like that, and it was just like a cool, like as somebody who had like wanted to play games like World of Warcraft but was never going to get into like the massively online nature of them until 15 years later in Final Fantasy 14 online or whatever it was, 20 years later, whatever it was, 25, oh my god, I'm so old. but yeah, playing the dot hack games was just like a weird, absurd, like super obscure. Like that is one of the like one of my more deep cut games, I would say, probably of that
Mm-hmm.
era. But I still certainly look back fondly on those games, as well as like games like the Summoner series, Summoner 1 and 2, which were like basically like Summoner was like one of the launch games. The Bouncer from Square Enix was another one that like is often kind of shouted out as like a hidden gem of that era. Like I had a ton of fun with the PS2 era of things. And it probably hit at like a great time for me because I was in college for a good chunk of that era.
Mm-hmm.
And so like having games that I could put a ton of time into when I had the time to put time into games was certainly a
Yeah.
nice treat. So yeah, absolutely shout out to PS2.
Absolutely. PS3, Trev, what you got?
So PS3 for me, this is where when we were talking like PlayStation being weird, this is where like I think
Yeah.
of for that, but it's also like this was the like probably the high point for third party work.
Yeah.
Um
Unquestionably.
and I was very, fortunate again since I didn't have a 360 and had continued kind of sticking my horse behind the PlayStation 3. I was appreciative that enough of those series also came to PS3
Mm-hmm.
because this is where you have stuff like Arkham games, you have the
Yep.
Batman games, you have some of those franchises continuing on, a la God of War and stuff. And even if I didn't like the stories, I still enjoyed the gameplay of God of War
Mm-hmm.
3 and had a ton of fun with that. But this is also, of course, where you get Naughty Dog rebranding themselves and doing Uncharted and then The Last of
Yep.
Us and kind of like
Yep.
setting the world on fire for narrative games and narrative storytelling and stuff. And this is where like my interest in that genre shifts because Final Fantasy isn't putting out things that I'm interested in. The Lightning trilogy, not a trilogy of games I have much affinity for and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Bethesda picks up the pieces and gives us Fallout 3 and Elder Scrolls Oblivion and eventually,
Vegas.
also Skyrim and stuff like that. And like Fallout 3, I put a ton of time into. Fallout New Vegas, I put a ton of time into in that era. So like Western RPGs, Mass Effect, this is where I get into the Mass Effect series, and of like eventually I get to play Mass Effect 1, but I first start with Mass Effect 2 and then boot up my PC and figure out how to download the original Mass Effect so I can see how that story began. And then eventually would get to play kind of all three games when down the line the Xbox exclusivity on the original Mass Effect game gets released. But yeah, like Western RPGs take over for me at this point because Square Enix in doing their best work in a lot of that era. And so getting to kind of experience a lot of that stuff was a ton of fun. And then just the action brawlers that you start getting with games like Arkham were a ton of fun of that era as well.
Yeah, the Arkham games are great. Obviously, I'm really playing Arkham Asylum right now. Did it earlier today. Bioshock is one I want to give a shout out to. Bioshock 1 and 2.
Infamous 1 and 2, like we talked about in the past with Cole. Yeah.
Yep. Another great shout out. Resistance series. I'm not a fan of it, but I know people really like Killzone. Right, like I think of those games, you already mentioned Uncharted and Last of Us, but like obviously those are two of my favorite series ever, favorite games ever. This to me is also an era really defined by Call of Duty, right? Like Modern Warfare coming out and like blowing the doors off of what I'd previously seen, from a first-person shooter, for what a lot of people had seen from a first-person shooter, right? And it continued that onwards with World at War, which introduced the world to Nazi zombies and how that changed like online, like gaming as well. I feel like was its own paradigm shift, and spending countless hours in college playing through Nazi zombies with friends, just like again and again and again. This is where we get Black Ops, which is one of my favorite first-person shooter games ever. Like Call of Duty just dominated so much of this like first chunk of this era for me with playing through all these games in college with like all the bros. And then you get stuff, like Bioshock for more narrative-focused games. Red Dead Redemption happens here, right? Like GTA 4 as well, but GTA 4 is a bit shakier.
And GTA 5.
And GTA 5.
Yeah.
That's also right. Yeah, that's true, didn't it? but like Red Dead Redemption, right, and like being swept away by like how beautiful that game is, right? Like this is such a great flowering, I think, of narrative focused games with great characters at the heart, which is what I always say. Like I play games for the stories, and now I could do it like while just playing the game, not having to like read the booklet that came with the game to get a lot of what I wanted out of it. I could just actually see it on screen and get great cutscenes and get great character moments throughout. And yeah, obviously like culminating with like kind of the crown jewel of the system, which is like The Last of Us happening right before the release of the PS4. Yeah, I think the PS3 is so special. It's where I first started writing about games as well. So like that's when it became like also like a passion and like quasi thing I'm doing on the side as well happened here. And kind of like reignited my love and like passion for games after kind of playing the PS2 for too long. The PS3 came out and like really sparked that again. I just think it's a super special like console with so many deep cut weird games on here.
That's yeah.
And
Like,
I think Hitman Absolution is great as well for a Hitman game on the system. Like there's so much here.
I was gonna say like this is the beginning of the PSN and
Yep.
like you said something about like oh something is flowering and I was like Flower was a great
Flower.
game. People obviously give Journey a lot more love, but I love I probably
I
like
love
Flower better.
I agree.
Because I think it's just a more vibrant and colorful experience and like
Walking Dead Season 1 and Telltale games.
But even that like I like when I was growing up, one of my goals when I was rich was going to be I'm going to buy myself a Simpsons arcade cabinet because I loved the Simpsons arcade game growing up.
Yeah.
Never got to that point. I could probably afford one now, but I'm not going to try and squeeze it into this studio apartment. But I bought The Simpsons on PSN on my PS3 and was able to play it there. And I was like, close enough.
Yeah.
So shout out to that. That's like the Scott Pilgrim game originally was on PS3.
Unfinished Swan,
sure.
Thomas Was Alone.
Yeah, Thomas Was Alone was a great one. Yeah, like
so much good
that's
stuff.
like I remember I would get really into the like when PlayStation would do we're gonna do a summer of like indie or not because it was Xbox was like the summer of games kind of stuff, but like they would do like in March we're gonna highlight an indie game every week. And is where you get stuff. Is this where you get is Counter Spy on PS3 as well? I know it's obviously PS4, but
I don't think it's on PS4.
But like you had like Hohokam and like weird games like that like I remember picking up and like putting a ton of time into and having fun with and just being like this is like just shapes and beats. Or not just shapes and beats. Was it just shapes and beats? Sound shapes. Yeah, that one. I think sound shapes. But yeah, like just like the weird eclectic mix of fun,
all the indies,
PSN indies, kind of starting to really take off in that era
for me in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Yep, and like everything Giant Sparrow did. Yeah, I mean, like it is such a great system, and obviously the PS4 would go into far greater success. But in a lot of ways, like those games and that catalog of games in the PS3 they really just nailed it in a lot of ways. It's a great little console. Trevor, you actually have something before the PS4, I believe. You're going to talk about the Vita, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I wanted to throw the PS Vita on here.
Absolutely.
This was like just while the PSP is much lauded for as the PlayStation handheld. I played the PSP. I ended up buying two PSPs because I rage quit infamously playing Dissidia one day and smashed my screen in two, and picked it up again. But like the PSP, like it was cool getting to play some of those, Final Fantasy handhelds and stuff. But the PS Vita was the one that I really like enjoyed and put a ton of my time into, and it was where I would play the games that were on PC, but I wasn't really gonna sit down and play them on PC. So they came to the Vita, and I like had a great time with them. But of course, the most notable standout would be Persona 4 Golden, phenomenal game. But also shout out to games like Rogue Legacy, which PC game that I played through, and like it was one of the first roguelites that I really actually enjoyed and connected with, and
Golden Abyss.
Would beat Golden Abyss out there on the Vita, sure. Guacamelee games though, Guacamelee 1 and 2,
Guacamelee,
ton of fun. Severed in particular. Shout out to like the support that Drinkbox Studios gave the Vita.
Mm-hmm.
The Velocity games, Velocity 2X,
Yes, Velocity
were
2X in
were a
particular
ton
is
of fun.
phenomenal. So good.
And being able to play the PS1 classics, the PSP classics, like those all on the Vita as well. Like again,
Mm-hmm.
I put a ton of time into earlier Final Fantasy games or Harvest Moon Back to Nature on my PS Vita because they gave me that option. I'm hopeful that some of the news we end up getting this week with whatever PlayStation's kind of working on reopens the door to getting to play some of those older games on a modern console and stuff. But yeah, the Vita, again, precursor for what the Switch is doing and does very effectively now, and what, eventually, hopefully, my Steam Deck will also be able to do. The Vita was the one that, like, the joke of the Vita died so that the Switch could live.
Yeah.
I think there is absolutely some kind of like some credence to that, but yeah, and especially because like with PlayStation Plus, so many things were like cross buy or cross play or whatever, and I could play them on my PlayStation 3 and boot up the save on my Vita and stuff like that. Like Borderlands 2 ran terribly on the Vita, but I could still do it if I really wanted to.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy 10-2 I bought on the Vita, as well as like on the PS3 of that era, so I could like revisit and replay those games and share my saves across those games and stuff like that. So yeah, I put a ton of time into my Vita. Eventually retired it after having a whole bunch of fun people sign it at PSX, but then I got like the special like gold Final Fantasy or Persona 4 Golden Dancing All Night like specialty Vita imported from Japan, so I got to still continue playing a lot of those fun joyous experiences and stuff out there. So yeah, shout out to PlayStation
That's a great
Vita.
Shout out. So yeah, let's talk about the PS4. What a good little console with a lot of great games. Obviously one of the highest selling consoles of all time. The PS4. Yeah, I mean, I'll start us off with probably maybe not my favorite game of the console, but maybe actually it is, which is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. You get in stuff like that on it. You get in stuff like Life is Strange, Rocket League, obviously, the finale of both Uncharted and the Last of Us series. You're kind of getting all of these great range of games on here, in addition to its own fun, cool mix of smaller, more like indie level surprises on the platform. I think you're also getting stuff like Pyre, which is one of my favorite games. Really, what remains of Edith Finch is on this console as well, obviously. There's so much good on the PS4, actually. The Yakuza series really, I think, came into its own with both remasters and then actual like Song of Life and stuff like that on the PS4. Yeah, there's a lot of good here, actually. Trevor, any highlights for you?
I mean, obviously God of War, the reboot of God of War on the PS
favorite game of all time. Yeah,
for generation. Yep. Horizon, like a lot of like in my list, I basically like combine PlayStation 4 and 5 because so much like we're still early enough in the PS5 generation that like I know enough games from the PS4 generation are going to continue on in series. Ghost of Tsushima, your game of the year a couple years ago, PS4.
Absolutely.
The Ratchet & Clank reboot, Spider-Man and Spider-Man Miles Morales. Final Fantasy 14, which has been out there and been available for PlayStation people since PS3, but like I finally got into it here in the PS4 and now PS5 era.
Game of the year last year for you.
Yeah, my game of the year was was Endwalker for that last year. But yeah, like Horizon Zero Dawn, that is now evolving into Horizon Forbidden West. The Sony first party just started like
went off,
like knocking every single thing out of the park. Even Infamous Second Son, while not maybe reaching the highs that people enjoyed about the Infamous series, like still a great fun time, and it was a great fun early PlayStation 4 experience on that front. Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royale, arguably the best Persona games in that series. Just like a ton of just all around great experiences in the modern era of gaming. And that's like not even well, when Shadow of Mordor, was that PS3 still or PS4? whatever
I'm
those
not
were.
sure about
Like I
that.
had fun with those games. I had a ton of fun with those games when I played them.
Super
and stuff
Meat
like
Boy
that.
on the PS4 is one of my favorite games.
There you
right?
go.
Huge Super Meat Boy
Um,
fan.
so yeah, like I think like even Fallout 4, The Witcher 3,
Mm,
Metal Gear Solid
mm.
5, like those were three of my
Until
games of the
Dawn,
year,
right?
the year that those came out. And
Yeah.
that was as somebody who like loved Fallout, so great, but like The Witcher had never really gotten into, but that's a great game. And Metal Gear Solid 5, having never played anything else in the series, really, really loved Metal Gear Solid 5 and how mechanically that felt. And story was bonkers and nonsense and Kojima, but like the game itself, a ton of fun. Dragon Age Inquisition, I really liked earlier on in the series, or in the generation. I'm trying to think any other big ones I would
Resogun.
want to have. Yeah, Resogun was a solid. Like Housemark has always been like I've not loved Housemark as much as other people love Housemark, but
I agree.
they're
We're on the
definitely
same page
like
on this.
solid, like absolutely
Very talented.
solid kind of
Yeah,
entries in those. But yeah, like stuff like Rocket League, stuff like I mean like the
Rocket League's great.
PS
Oh my
Plus
God,
really
Rocket
kind of like
League's
coming
great.
into its own and
Coming
kind of
into its
like
own.
really figuring out how that offering could make games like Rocket League, like Fall Guys.
Yeah, Fall Guys.
Yeah, just bangers of a generation there.
Yeah, it's just fantastic generation of
even
games. I
stuff like
think.
the stuff that probably didn't get as much love or at least as much love from like critics, like Days Gone, a really fun game that I think
Mhm.
suffered from critics because they didn't like they had to rush to play it, and it's just a lot of game for that.
Yeah.
So like playing it on a more on like kind of on your own timeline that a lot of fans did, I think is why like fan reception around that game was better than kind of critical reception.
My
Um,
2015 game of the year, Dying Light,
there you go, Dying Light.
absolutely came out this year.
Yeah, just lots of real good stuff on these.
Yeah.
This still kind of current generation because obviously stuff is still coming out for the PS4.
Mhm.
In part probably because the PS5 is so scarce right now that
So hard
I
to
imagine
find.
games that were originally planned to just be PS5 games probably got a little bit of extra. Let's figure out how to make this work on the last gen system. Hell, even a PS5 exclusive like Godfall ended up coming out with a PS4 version because they were like, hey, apparently nobody really wanted to play Godfall on PS5. So yeah, lots
It
of good
is
stuff.
a lot of great stuff. It is a great, great set of consoles, and that's the list. Those are our consoles that we love.
Did
Those
you
are
have
our
a
favorite.
Did you have a 10th one, or was yours just
It'd be the
PlayStation 4
PS5.
and PS5? Yeah,
Right, it'd be the same thing,
Gotcha.
right? Yeah, those are our 10 favorite consoles and the games we wanted to highlight and shout out on them respectively. Thank you for listening. Trevor, do you have any shout outs this week?
I do not. No.
Let's wrap it up then here. Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard or saw, you can go over to youtube.com/thatnerdy site where you might already be. Hit the like button, subscribe to the video, ring the little bell notification, and leave your comments and thoughts on what some of your favorite consoles are and some of your favorite games on them. You can also go over to the podcast service of your choice, like and subscribe to the feed, rate and review us on iTunes. Give us the 5 stars. It really does help get more eyes and ears on the shows, and we really do appreciate it. Finally, you can also go check out thatnerdysite.com. We can find all it is reviews, features, podcasts, and written pieces going live there Monday through Saturday. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trev, anything that you want to plug?
Yeah, I'll plug the Let's Plays over on youtube.com/thatnerdysite. This week's Tuesday Let's Play is going to be Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. Basically, I played the opening chunk of that game. And I don't know what Thursday is going to be, but it might just be a Xbox Game Pass offering because, again, shout out to that, being able to kind of fill in some slots when I need to figure out what I want to play for a Let's Play for this site.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, check out the Let's Plays every Tuesday and Thursday. New Let's Plays going up on the YouTube.
Everyone go check it out. It's really, really good. In addition, you can go find me at LeftyLoggy or LeftyLoggy, LOGGY. I will echo that and also encourage everyone to go check out That Nerdy Site Show, the weekly conversational podcast we have go live every Monday. A lot of good stuff there. A lot of good conversations are happening on that one. In addition to that, obviously, there is also That D Plus Show and That Bond Show. Lots of good content and podcasts happening over on That Nerdy Site. Go check all of it out. It's all very good. Otherwise, if you like what you heard, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site, play your games and be good to each other.